Now, the Oedipus crisis. So Oedipus is an interesting character in Greek mythology, and Freud uses a lot of Greek mythology to apply to psychology at the time, because you remember this is the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we still use Greek mythology. You guys learn it, everybody from William Shakespeare in English, and you guys usually take some Greek mythology. You learn it in middle school, or you learn it in literature. You talk about Greek mythology. You have to understand the stories of, and you might read the Iliad and the Odyssey and the story of Troy. Well, some of my students have read the story of Oedipus, but the story is essentially, we're not going to do the whole thing, but the big idea with the story of the Oedipus, and he calls it the crisis or complex, some people call it, is that Oedipus basically he goes out and he had killed his own father, and then he realizes later in life by trying to find the guy that murdered his father that he is his own killer, the killer of his father, and that he had actually married his mother um, unintentionally, and he discovers that the truth is he had killed his own father and he had married and fallen in love with his own mother. Well, Freud says the Oedipus crisis or complex is exactly that. So what happens is when a boy is growing up, especially children, they go through this stage where they want to kill their father because they see him competition for their mother's love. And he goes as far as to say it's not just physically he wants their mother's attention, but sexually. So again, I'm going to reference the fact that he does work with a lot of sexually and physically and mentally ill people, and he may even came across people like pedophiles, which is what psychologists have to work with. They aren't. Everybody has a right, and they try to help all these people because they can prevent these guys and girls from hurting children. So it's very important that they do this. And Freud probably did some very important work in that vein. However, while I'm sure it's true, and you guys are probably seeing that boys can be, kind of competing with their dads for attention from their mother or their mother's love, it's probably more has to do with attention. But he says it is sexual in nature, but he thinks everything is sexual in nature. He also says some theorists have suggested the girls have a similar experience, and they call this the Electra crisis. And the Electra is not the same uh, situation in Greek mythology, but Electra does go out and try to find out who killed her father because she's supposedly in love with her father. But Electra crisis or Electra complex is that the girls want to basically knock out or kill their mother for their dad's love. So I'm sure you guys have probably heard the saying is, "Oh, you'll marry your mother or father." Well, again, that does make sense because in psychology we know that temperance or your temperament is the genetic trait of like kind of the way you approach the world is the most genetically piece of our personality. That's the one thing that stands out. If you've ever seen identical twins or twins in general, they generally have a lot of the same temperament. And I've actually just had identical twins, and their temperament was almost exactly the same. While they have different preferences for like what they eat, what video games they play, stuff like that to some degree, the way they approach you and the way they act towards you, it's about the same. If one's even keel, the other one's pretty even keel. If one's a hothead, the other one's a hothead, kind of the type A's and type B's. They don't fall too far from each other. So, with that said, we've learned in previous units that if you love somebody and your marriage or your long term relationship's going to last, we tend to do better with people that are like us. Like attracts like tends to be much more um, long lasting than opposites attract. So if your mother has a lot of personality traits that you have and she's been a loving, caring mom, it's probably going to be very attractive to you as a son, or vice versa. If you're a daughter, that your father has always been a good guy and you like his temperament and the way he treats everybody, you might look for that quality in your husband or your long-term mate. So there is truth in this, but I'm not sure that Freud doesn't go a little bit overboard with the sexual component to it. Now, in the phallic stage, Freud suggests that boys and girls notice that their physical differences. Well, that's true. We know that kids go through a point where they find out the boys have a penis, and that that girls have their uterus. However, you'll hear the kids walking around talking about it. But he says that the girls actually envy the penis, and he calls this penis envy. That they almost have like this phantom organ, which they think it's there or feel it's there or they want it to be there, and it's not. So they're very envious of this. Where he's probably a little wrong is he didn't realize that females do have a miniature penis, which is called the clitoris, and you guys learn that in biology and sexual education. Now, on the other side, you have boys suffer from castration anxiety, and this is an interesting theory. His fear, and they act out and they fear and they misbehave because of this. Okay? And basically, their fear is that their fathers are going to castrate them. And if you know what castrate means, it's going to hold them down and take off their manhood, or specifically their testicles. And while castration has been used historically, a lot of times as a punishment, if somebody hurt people or something sexually, they might castrate them. And also they would castrate boys that would sing in like Gregorian chants or high level la 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 orchestras. They would do this over the centuries to keep their voice high, because your vocal cords decrease with the amount of testosterone you have as males. And if you do remove the testicles early enough, apparently it does cut down on the amount of testosterone you release into your body. We've learned that in biology. I don't think that most boys walk around with a fear that their dads are going to hold them down and cut their testicles off. Boys probably act out for other reasons, like maybe culturally it's more acceptable for boys to quote-unquote be boys. We do know that boys tend to connect and look up to older boys much quicker and faster than females do in nature. So something's going on. It might have to do with hunting and gathering, or competition for the species, like competition to get girls. Maybe and we have alpha males, dominant females. Maybe it has something to do with this, more likely than a fear of the father and competition for the mother's love. But they do create what are called defense mechanisms, identification. And we do use these terms of like, okay, in psychology, this might be a defense mechanism, something you're doing in your mind to protect you. Your conscious mind and thoughts are painful. Now, identification is when people emulate and attract themselves to an individual they believe threatens them. So if somebody's scared of you, you identify with them, as Freud would say it, and you kind of keep your enemies close. Fear of your father is you'll stay as close as you can to your father because you're scared he's going to castrate you. And that causes a lot of anxiety. Well, somebody might become friends with their father or close to their dad. And yes, they might fear their dads, but maybe it's because their dads are strict, or their dads can give them consequences, or their dads can, take away TV time or screen time or ground them. I don't know. But in Freud's case, he thought it has more to do with they're going to physically hurt their private areas. Now, the latency stage is around 6 years of puberty, is which children push for their sexual feelings out of conscious awareness and repression. So they repress their sexual feelings. You're going through puberty, which is the physical and mental development of the body to prepare to have children, and you repress a lot of your conscious awareness and a lot of your desires. That's the latency stage. He says that children turn the attention to other issues. They focus on other things when really it's all about their desire to be sexual through oral and anal and phallic stages. At puberty, children enter the last of Freud's stages, the adult genitalia stage, where people remain in the stage for the rest of their lives. So I, as an adult, are still in this according to Freud. that they receive pleasure through sexual relationships with others. Which is interesting. While it's true that I think humans, dolphins, and primates, like other ape-like beings, enjoy sex, almost all other species do it just to procreate. It's something they have to do, like a dog or a cat, and people might think they're enjoying it, but it's a very necessary thing that we continue the race. While there might not be a whole bunch of different races of people, there is the human race. And the way that we pass on our genes and our genetic makeup and material is through sexual intercourse. However, I don't think that most psychologists would argue that this is a very healthy approach to um, to having healthy sexual relationships, which are very important in psychology and therapy, that you do have good, healthy sexual relationships. And he thinks that most adults become fixated with sex. Either they're undergratified or overgratified. Well, and we could see through research that actually our interaction sexually has decreased, which is interesting. It's been going down for years. And right now, one of probably the biggest causes that it's going down even in healthy relationships is because of things like social media and screen time. And social anxiety might be reducing our desire. So people are, instead of spending time physically and emotionally and mentally, we're probably spending more and more time on our cell phones. And we got the headphones on for 8 hours a day, and we're cutting off from each other. And that is even showing up in healthy relationships like marriage and boyfriends and girlfriends and long-term relationships. And that's not good, because that probably shows up quite a bit in therapy as people get marriage counseling, or they get therapies, couples counseling, where they need somebody to talk to them, like, hey, you got to put the phone down. You got to put the phone down, and you got to put the headphones down, and you got to start listening to each other. He also thinks we have an oral fixation. You might see this, people wanting their binky, or they're sucking on their thumbs or fingers. Some of that probably has more to do with teething when you're a child, and again, your sensory development. But he didn't pick up on that as much. He thought that had a sexual context. Freud believed in two types of instinctual existence. He believes in the eros, the life instinct. That's our sex drive, this idea that we have to keep going. We want to live. We want to pass down our genetic material by intercourse. And thanatos is the death instinct. That's us being bad. That's your amygdala, or your desire, your id. Your id is constantly trying to be heathenistic and wants pleasure, and you want to do dumb or bad things. And your real sex drive is your libido. And we still use these terms today. Like, that guy's got a high or low libido. Teenagers have boys have such a high libido, And eros is most often evidenced as a desire for sex, while thanatos is seen as aggression. So we're angry and we have sex, we want sex, and we're sexually frustrated. And a lot of this has to do with our eros and our id and our unconscious mind. We're not aware of this all going on. And that shows up in our dreams, he would say. Some really important terms, though, is that we repress, and we use these terms still today, other than libido as our sex drive, is repression, is blocking thoughts out from our conscious awareness. So you can repress thoughts, and that is true. We do find evidence that, especially, and I've seen this, that people that are sexually abused or physically abused, they can repress their thoughts, which can cause things like hyper and hyposexuality. So sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of people that are hypersexual or people that flaunt their sexuality are kind of unhealthy with it maybe. They can become strippers, or they use it like for money, like a prostitute, or they get into the filming industry, the adult film industry. And the reason could possibly be, I'm not saying always, is that they're trying to devalue their sexuality. Like, it's not a big deal. It's not important. Horrible things happened to me when I was a kid. This is me taking back control and repressing my thoughts. And if I make money off of it, it shows that it's not a big deal. It's just like going to the bathroom when I have sex. It's not a big deal. Which I think most therapists would say that's not a healthy approach to sex either. That can be very dangerous, because you could get sick, or you take unnecessary risks, or you could pull yourself into physical and sexual abuse, being around people that do want to hurt you. Then you have the other side of it is hyposexual, would be somebody, and I've seen this from when I worked with people with disorders where they are so abused that they don't want that to happen at all. And that can have problems when you have a healthy marriage or a relationship with the person. They don't they don't feel comfortable expressing themselves sexually or physically or intimately. And they can't open up and kiss and hug and snuggle and do that. And that can cause a marriage or relationship to go south. Because if you have one person that doesn't have the same kind of libido as Freud would say, and the drive's not about the same, it could result in the marriage or the relationship faltering or falling apart. Denial is not accepting the ego threat truth, your denial. Displacement, you guys have probably seen displacement where we put our feelings of anger, frustration, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse on others. I've seen this quite a bit as a teacher at school. I think a lot of teachers get frustrated because if you've never been around or understand people that have been abused, you don't understand that like a student or somebody else might be yelling, screaming, or getting mad or throwing things or whatever, or getting into fights because they're angry or displacing their anger from really they might be angry at their parents or their grandparents or a stepbrother or mother or father or somebody that's hurt them physically and sexually. They can't show the anger towards them, or even if it's over, they can't take it out on their mom or dad because their mom and dad will whoop them or ground them or do this and that. They'll displace all that negative emotions and they'll project. This is the next thing is called projection, believing those feelings onto someone else. So it's easy to throw that onto teachers, and that's why a lot of students probably see students might get mad or angry because maybe they're exhausted because they don't sleep, and then you put the other layer they've been abused, and you have to remember I believe it's about 1 out of 5 females have been sexually abused in America, and I'm sorry, maybe 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 boys. It's higher than girls than girls, which is scary. But the numbers themselves are just incredibly scary. Being somebody that's always been safe and lucky in that sense, and working with over the years a lot of people, and a lot of kids don't know that other kids do have these problems. You do see the projection, and projection can also be in other ways. Like you could have, and we've probably all seen it at sporting events, like when you go to a high school football or basketball game. Sometimes parents project, or they live vicariously through their son, like being a great basketball player, and they want you to be a great basketball player. When the odds of you becoming a professional basketball player and being LeBron James are pretty slim. There's maybe 800 guys in the NBA and maybe another 600 in the WNBA. So being a professional female or male athlete is pretty low. Not saying you shouldn't try, but you probably should use college as most people do and get your academic scholarships when there's about 10 to 1 on that. And then your reaction formation is expressing the opposite of how you feel. So you do the opposite. You act happy when you're sad or upset about things, or you're sad and depressed when you're pretty happy, trying to get attention.